Welcome everyone to another episode of In a Nutshell, the podcast hosted by Natural Gas World, where we look at the global news and trends in the gas industry. My name is Joseph Murphy, and today we are joined by Mark Gyetvay, CFO and Deputy Chairman of the Management Board of Novatec, Russia's largest independent gas producer and its biggest LNG exporter. We'll be discussing Novatec's business plans, particularly in the decarbonisation arena. Glad to have you with us, Mark.
Thank you very much, Joseph. It's great to be here today.
So to start off, could you just walk us through Novatec's initiatives aimed at, decarbonising its production, but also potentially exporting some green products like hydrogen?
Yeah, it's something that we have thought about quite extensively. And we actually outlined in our strategy in 2017 that we believe our pathway forward to decarbonizing society is to increase our share of natural gas in the marketplace, and that was our LNG platform. But as time progressed, we start seeing other steps that we can do in our operations that we feel that we can lower our carbon footprint even further. Although we believe we are one of the lowest GHG emission companies in the world already, and we believe that we can take certain steps, such as add in wind to the power grid, hydrogen fuel mix into the turbines, compressors, etc. Continue with some of our solar work in terms of the telemetric meter for our pipeline infrastructure pipeline, and so. We're doing various things today. CCS is a perfect example, like we're working on at Yamal LNG. And so I think as we look today, many of these things and many of the MOUs that we recently signed with the likes of Baker Hughes, Siemens, Fordham, even internally inside of Russia, working with, MLMK, Seversol, because we believe if we help them, that reduces our scope 3. So when we approach this process, we look at both scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Obviously, scope 3 being the hardest because it's a combustion side that we don't control. But if we can work with our client base to understand how best to decarbonize their business, I think we can contribute. So some of the things that we're working on right now that has, I guess, recently seen in the press, although some of the things that we see is purely speculative at this point, because until such time as we formally complete a study of it, of a situation like, for example, you see probably recently there was a discussion about us adding wind power, and so let's talk about that for a second, because that seems to be the latest news that I see in the marketplace. It's something that we need to look at it from a wind map perspective. So I think the first thing that we're going to have to do in terms of understanding whether or not this is a viable, economically feasible project for us to do is understand the wind flows in the Arctic Circle. And so that would be the first process. And I think that will go on for a study, will go on for a period of time, and then we'll make the decision. The other thing that we've been working on, as I mentioned before, is that Yamal LNG is considered using carbon capture and storage at its facility. So over the last year, 18 months, we took a project to understand how we can inject, where's the subsurfaces in this particular facility around where we can inject carbon. The problem that we have with this process, so we identified subsurfaces, we identified the number of injector wells that we have. The problem we have, there's no legal basis inside of Russia to do this yet. So we have to get through the regulatory process. So I think in the CCS project for Yamal, we're anticipating probably taking a decision, a FID decision sometime in 2022. The other ones, like I said, working with Baker Hughes on a hydrogen blend mix, we feel that, some of the things that we made a recent announcement, for example, we made a recent announcement that we're going to possibly change our Opsky project to a gas chemistry project. And so when we look at that particular project as an example, it's mostly ammonia based. That's the idea. So because today we look at hydrogen, although with all its discussions, we still think it's it's technically challenging to move product around. So the infrastructure needs to be built out. So the plant that we're looking at is possibly, and we're going to go into a pre-feed study as we speak. I think probably in the next 2-3 months, we'll probably make an announcement on selecting, contractors to work on the study. But the idea is possibly to produce ammonia, because we see ammonia as a viable transport product that's needed around the world. Hydrogen would probably be only a small part of the output, and that output probably be used internally, so probably not something to sell. So the clean product that we would look at will most likely be either methanol or ammonia. So you'll be some of the initiatives right now.
I see. Very interesting. So you'll be exporting the methanol and ammonia, and in likelihood, the hydrogen would be used by yourself, perhaps in power generation. So, I mean, the original plan for this Obsk project was to produce, I think it was roughly around 5 million tons per year of LNG. I believe you hadn't quite settled on a number beforehand, but what is the rationale of switching that project from 5 million tons of LNG to methanol to ammonia?
Well, it's not decided 100% yet if we're going to shift it completely. Okay, so what we're looking at is, the optionality, giving us that optionality to be able to go in and decide whether or not we feel that, given what the market may require, certain regions of the world require cleaner fuels, we might have the opportunity to convert a LNG project that was originally estimated to be, like you said correctly, about 5 million tons. It was 2 trains at 2.5 million tons each, into a gas chemistry project. But we haven't made the decision yet to scrap the LNG, because we actually may even do an LNG, but maybe not to the same size. So I think there's still time, and that's why we spent a lot of time this past year on the feed work for the LNG. Now we're going to go into a pre-feed study for the gas chemistry process.
And is there any discussion at Novatec about exporting hydrogen? So I seem to recall there was a preliminary deal between Novatec and a German energy company last year, perhaps Uniper. Correct me if I'm wrong. On creating hydrogen supply chain. So is that at all on the agenda? Maybe at a later stage?
No, I think it's on the agenda, but I think the question that we have, Joseph, is the idea of understanding, the economics, and understanding the infrastructure build out, and quite frankly, the demand. Because I mean, at this point right now, we don't have a firm picture, and I think this is just not only at Novatec. I think if you had a chance to talk to many of the other IOCs out there in the marketplace, they would pretty much give you the same situation. It's definitely there. We understand the process, because this year we're going to commission, for example, at our Ust-Luga complex by the end of this year, which we've been building, a hydrocracker unit. The hydrocracker unit will have production of hydrogen. Okay. Now, again, is it going to be in sufficient quantities to have some small exports? I'm not sure at this particular time, because I think that's a commercial question. Most likely it would be used domestically. So I think this question still remains to be answered, but it's definitely something we're looking at. I mean, there's no question. I think the industry is looking at this pretty closely. But you got to have, I think in a hydrogen question, I think you have to look at what clusters you want to deliver, because I think it's, from a transport, like I said, from a transport perspective, it's quite difficult at this point. And that's why we thought initially that ammonia will be used as a transport, and then you can separate hydrogen out at a later date, somewhere down the process chain. But I still think everybody is looking at this from a study perspective, and a decision has not been made at this point.
I realize it's still early days with these projects, but what sort of rate of return on investment do you expect to make from them? So with the Obsk plan, that's exporting a product, ammonia, methanol. But with the carbon capture, and using hydrogen potentially as or wind as power generation at Yamal LNG. You also have to consider the added benefit of you're going to be selling cleaner LNG, which potentially could fetch a premium on the market.
I don't know. We have a lot of debates about this, Joseph, on with the concept of green LNG. And my take on this whole situation is that, we had 10 cargoes roughly that were sold that were basically certified as green. Maybe some of them got premiums, some of them didn't. I don't know the economics and the commercial rationale from the buyer sellers. But in our position, as somebody who wants to grow their LNG business to up to 70 million tons by the end of this decade, I think there's going to be steps that we're going to need to make as a company to further decarbonize our business process. So there's going to be investments that we're going to have to make that are going to be just requisite investments, necessary investments that is going to be required just to sell LNG. So I think when we look at this concept of green LNG, I think that's going to go away, and all LNG in the future will have some elements of this concept of green, but you won't use that moniker green anymore because all LNG would be green. So I think it's just going to be driven by the marketplace, and a lot of times what we face from a commercial side and questions that often get asked is, we're a supplier of hydrocarbons, right? In this case, natural gas. We have customers. We really have to listen to what the customer wants. And in this regard, whether you talk about term, tenor, destination or FOB, pricing structures, you're essentially looking at the customer and working with them. Now they're getting pressure also on the downstream side, on the combustion side. So, the question you have to understand from this perspective is when we look at the greening of LNG, the problem is if we look at the upstream processing side, we might be talking maybe 20% of the actual emissions, 80% being on the combustion side. So, it's really an important step for the buyers to ensure that they're delivering green, clean LNG into their markets, because they're also, like I said, they're getting pressure from their customers. They're getting pressure from their governments. So I think this whole idea about a premium market, is going to go away. I just think it's not something that we're going to look at in the future. And this question that we're talking about now, because obviously it's a new developing concept, will be one that we won't really talk about in the future because all LNG would be green.
I see. Okay. Now you mentioned Novatec's plan to ramp up production of LNG to up to 70 million tons per year by 2030. As you're well aware, the IEA recently made waves in the industry by advising that in a scenario where the world meets its net zero target, no more investment in oil and gas is needed beyond already approved projects. What's your view on that recommendation?
Well, I've stated many times already that Novatec's pathway forward to decarbonization is to sell more gas, not less. So I don't consider natural gas to be a transition fuel or a bridge fuel. I consider it to be an integral part of the future energy mix. And we don't see any destructions in terms of where gas will fit in the future energy. We still think it's going to be somewhere in the 23 to 26 to 28% of the total primary energy source. So, what happened in my case, when I look at what happened a couple of weeks ago when the IEA came out with their net zero emissions 250 roadmap, I think what they did, they basically published like the worst case scenarios, fear mongering narratives. And that's what the media picked up. That's exactly what the media wanted to hear. And I think they did more, injustice to reality, because it's not reality. It's not reality we're talking about here. There's just no way that we can continue with a growth of 2 billion people by 2050, more than double on the economic activity, and think that we're going to go into society where electrification is going to be 90% renewables. The IEA, what we really should be talking about is that there's different regions in the world that have different economic development points, right? So if the IEA is basically a EU think tank kind of concept run by, the EU, which is part of this green movement, that has a completely different economic growth path than China or India or Africa. And, when we look at the amount of, the population growth, and we see that out of that 2 billion population growth, about 90% is going to be urbanization. Urbanization is going to imply more energy because you got to build steel, concretes, roads, et cetera. And I just think to raise the standard of living and increase, economic prosperity, you're going to need energy. And like I said, and we believe that the pathway forward in part of this decarbonization, it's not the only pathway. See, this is where the debate needs to be a honest debate, because we believe natural gas is just one element of decarbonization. So that's one element of this energy transition from coal to natural gas, as an example. Part of it's going to be renewables where you can use it. Part of it will be hydrogen, as we talked about earlier. But to say that no new investments are needed post 2021, you're going to already see by the end of this year, you'll see all the IOCs, you'll see Novatek, you'll see other Russian oil and gas come out with their investment propositions and CapEx programs, and it's just going to dispel this as being totally ridiculous comment that they made.
So is net zero by 2050 a realistic goal? Is it a practical goal? Is it a goal that we should be striving for?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think the energy industry needs to focus on issues of methane, emissions. I think that was something that it's more practical. See, I think the issue, Joseph, is when you take CO2 and you focus only on CO2 as one element in a multivariate ecosystem of which climate change. I just think you're not really painting a realistic perspective of what needs to be done to address this question on carbon emissions, net zero. Because I think what you really need to do, also in the same light, is if you want to make this comment and you want to reach that goal, you really have to come out to society and say your economic standard of living is going to have to change. You no longer can fly to these places that you want to go. You no longer can drive these places that you want to drive to, and so it's going to take a whole societal change, and that's why I said this 20/80 split between what the energy oil and gas industry is doing. But the other thing too is I think that's often misunderstood, Joseph. The oil and gas industry in total is basically making significant investments. So if you look at the whole picture on this whole decarbonization process, even the shift into green energy, it's the oil and gas industry that are making probably the most significant portion of that investment into transitioning away from traditional dirtier fossil fuels into what people perceive to be cleaner fuels. Now, when I look at companies like Novatec as an example, and I look at the sort of the historical evolution of the oil and gas industry as a discussion point or as an analog, we look at a position and say the IOCs were primarily oil companies with a big refining and marketing arm. That was your Shells, BPs, Exxons, Mobil before the merger, Texaco, Chevron. All they were basically big oil companies with a downstream market, and their downstream refining led into their petrol retail stations, which was really their interface with society. Right. It was the purvey of the independent groups that really were searching for natural gas. So then we started seeing over time a change where we started seeing IOCs make acquisitions. When the shale revolution started in the United States, we saw Exxon make the big acquisition of XTO. Shell made the BG acquisition. But yet they're still not at a position yet where they're basically at a mix in their product mix that is more gas weighted. Total brought their investment into Novatek, et cetera. And now we're seeing a further shift down the chain where these IOCs are going into wind, solar, biofuels, et cetera. And where we at Novatec, we're 85% gas. All right. Whether you look at our production profile, you're looking at our resource base. So for us to make a dramatic shift to move away from what we do best, it's just not realistic from an operational perspective. So we continue to go down that path that we believe our contribution will be through natural gas. We can't make a shift.
And if we could, Mark, just now dive into Novatek's general business.
Okay.
So one of your projects underway now is the fourth train of Yamal LNG. So how is the progress going commissioning that facility? It's also a very significant project, even despite its small size, because of course it's showcasing Arctic Cascade, Novatek's own liquefaction technology. How is Arctic Cascade performing, and is Novatek developing any other technologies to reduce reliance on non-Russian models?
Well, I think for your audience would be a first interesting point is that our construction yard, our LNG construction yard in Murmansk, is the only large-scale facility dedicated 100% to LNG projects. So we were able at a very early stage to go out and bring contractors in and work with them to develop technologies and equipment that's domestically made for future LNG projects. So what Arctic Cascade is, it's a technology, as you rightly said, developed by some of our engineers internally. And what it does, it uses a different process based on the ambient temperature in the Arctic zone. So it's not a complex multi-fluid cascade. It basically uses nitrogen, et cetera, as one of the coolant ingredients. And so what we have to do right now, we have to get to see how effective it is. We need time because we need to go through the whole seasons. We need to see how it operates in the winter months, when it's warmer, how does it operate, et cetera. So it's kind of premature at this stage. It's commissioned already, it's producing. And what we need to do is just make sure that we have 12 to 18 months of operational experience, because there's always going to be tweaks that are going to be made to the structure based on what we learn through this, say, 12 to 18 months experience through parts of the climatic changes and the seasonal changes. So I think it's a little premature to give you an exact answer how its operating performance is until we get to data points. And like I said, and I think some of the things that we've already done already is by working with Russian enterprises, we've been able to develop. I mean, we're using the first time a cryogenic pump has been made inside of Russia, and we're using it on our Yamal project already. And so that technology is driven from the process of consolidating and trying to make some domestic investments so that we can build up a domestic business. And this is what's going to, like, people ask me a lot of times, Joseph, do I feel there's a risk with, Gazprom or Rosneft or somebody else making the decision going to LNG? The answer is no, because the more projects we have, the more opportunity we get to develop the indigenous domestic operations and production facilities. So actually, we welcome that kind of investments.
And so Yamal LNG, your flagship project, already at full capacity for some years now. Your next project, Arctic LNG 2, even larger by a few million tons per year, well on the way, due online in 2023. Then further ahead, the other two big projects you have are Arctic LNG 1 and Arctic LNG 3. Where are those projects at right now?
Yeah, I mean, just a little word on Yamal first. I mean, it's produced over 700 cargoes. Excuse me. It was the fastest project to reach 500 cargoes globally for large scale, and it's been a huge success. It's been operating, say, more than about 110% plus of its nameplate capacity. So in essence, it's actually producing about 2 million tons more on an annualized basis than its nameplate capacity. And so it's been a huge success, not only for Novatec, but for our partners. And as a result of that, we then now can see, what we can do actually in the Arctic zone. So we now at Arctic LNG 2, we're at the construction side of Arctic LNG 2 right now. So we're expect to launch the first train in 2023. We're roughly about 50% done with the process for train number one, about 40% overall project. We're drilling about, on an average quarterly basis, we're drilling about 6 wells, production wells each quarter. So we were more than 40%, I believe, done already for the number of wells that needed to be filled in for this particular first train. Just I think it was last week we announced that the first flight into the airport was landed from Tumen to Utrene field. So that will facilitate, again, the delivery of equipment, et cetera, to the particular plant. And so, this is going along according to plan. That's why we actually we stepped up the third train from 2026 to 2025 based on where we see ourselves today. Right. But I also want to just say, before we get into Arctic 1 and 3, one of the things that we did, as you may know, we moved and changed the concept completely different. So Yamal LNG was built on 38,000 pilings. So everything was above the permafrost. What we decided to do with Arctic LNG 2 and beyond is we're building these gravity-based structures. And that's what we're building inside of our Murmansk facility. And we're going to, I think it's like 14 modules that are being fabricated as we speak today in China, that basically come in and they fit onto the platform, which is this concrete-based barge. And what that does, each barge, there'll be 3 trains, there's 6.6 million tons per annum. And what that did is each train reduced our environmental footprint on the Arctic zone by it's about a quarter of the size. So we significantly reduced our footprint and this issue of permafrost, question by doing this GBS. So where we are on Arctic LNG 1, Arctic LNG 1 is basically in the exploration phase. We've been spending probably the last year and a half extensively doing exploration work. This year, we're expected to drill and test about 13 additional exploration wells, as well as run about 2,600 kilometers of 3D seismic, get that processed. Because in our estimation, in order to be able to go out and determine the size and scale of these projects, and in order for us to go out and farm out these particular projects to our partner base, is we need to first understand what the resource base looks like, how much production, size, and we will only do that until we're comfortable to understanding the geologies and production profile. Then we'll go out and talk to the market. That project, Arctic LNG 1, again, similar size, about 19.8, 3 trains at 6.6, is expected to be 26, 27, period of time when we start to the end of the decade. Now, Arctic LNG 3, the one that you alluded before, is in really early stage exploration. That project won't start until post 2030, but we have done exploration work on it already. We actually drilled a first well in 2018. It's in the bay in shallow waters, and the first well that we drilled and tested, DeGoyer McNaughton ascribed about 322 billion cubic meters of gas to that particular well so far for the resources, which made it in 2018. I think WoodMac listed it as the #1 exploration find in the world that particular year. So we have exploration activity that we need to do, and I suspect that will continue over the next year or 12 to 18 months. We'll start the second exploration well in that particular zone.
So yeah, I realize that you're still at the exploration phase with both of these projects, but do you have a rough target for when you want to take a FID on them?
I don't think definitely 3 is not anywhere near right now. So I would suspect that Arctic LNG 1 will probably be 23, probably in that order of magnitude in terms of timing.
Mhm.
Because you got to get the FID, and then you got to if we're because you're talking about a 2-3 year construction period now, right?
Right, sure.
And so to get this process started, get the partners in, which by the way we do have strong partner interest already in these particular projects, and it's just a question, like I said earlier, for us to come up with the exploration results before we go out and farm out these particular projects. So I would suspect 23, 24 the latest would be, I think, for FID decision on Arctic LNG 1.
And is it Novatec's preference to create partnerships for Arctic LNG 1, or is there a possibility the company will try and go it alone?
No, we're talking about a project in the orders of magnitude of $20+ billion. And so obviously from a risk sharing perspective, I think, and what we've seen, in terms of our ability to monetize from Yamal LNG to Arctic LNG 2 and the uplift in the valuation, I think it justifies that we try to keep maybe a 60-40 split, as we did in our first project.
So recent announcement that caught my eye was that Novatec is forming a joint venture with Gazprom to explore and develop an offshore Arctic block. This seemed like quite a big milestone for me, for the company, considering that it's mainly stayed onshore with its operations, and the offshore Arctic in Russia has traditionally been the realm of Gazprom and Rosneft. What potential do you see for offshore gas in Arctic gas?
Well, I think we got to look at it from the perspective of the Arctic zone in Russia. I mean, if you go back in time and look at what the U.S. Geological Service outlined in terms of its potential, I mean, we're talking about probably 30% of the undiscovered gas reserves in the world are concentrated in this Arctic zone, and so I think Surgit Neftegas did a well the other day, I think, and discovered gas, and Surgit primarily an oil company. So it's at a very early stage in the process. We just made the announcement. I think it is something different because it moves us out of our core, sort of area of the Yamal Gadam Peninsula. Yeah. But it's not with our partner. I mean, Gazprom Neft is a big partner with Novatec. I mean, we do Arctic Gas joint venture with them, and we're a close relationship. We understand their operations, and they understand our operation model, and so we'll just see. We'll do this exploration. I mean, right now we're uncertain of what the results will be, whether oil or gas combination thereof, and so I think this will be something that we'll talk about a little later once we start the actual work. Okay.
And you mentioned how this particular project is taking the company out of its main theatre of operations, Yamal, Jaidan peninsulas. Would Novatec consider developing liquefaction elsewhere in Russia, or even overseas, or is the main focus just going to be on the Arctic LNG?
Joseph, I think what many people don't understand is that Novatec already has worked on a small, medium, and large-scale projects now. So, our small-scale project was launched last year, 40,000-ton facility in Magnitogorsk in the Chelyabinsk region. And this is basically used to be able to transition modal transport from petrol to natural gas. And so we're building out a network of retail and fueling stations that take us almost from the St. Petersburg region in the northwest to the Ural Mountains, and we're trying to concentrate our efforts on being one of the leading suppliers of natural gas to transport fuel along the main federal highway system, right? So that's a small scale. A couple of years ago, we launched Cryogas Vysotsky. It's the only LNG complex in the Baltic Sea region, right? That's a project that we're doing right now. It was originally looked at taking a consideration of the ISO 2020, changes in fuel, bunker fuel, from 3.5 sulfur down to 0.5. And so when these new IMO regulations came in, we felt that the transition and shipping, the Baltic being one that is already green, would look at this particular project with excitement, and it has. It's now producing, a little slower startup than we normally would like to see. Now we're operating about 100% of its capacity, and it serves, like I said, the Baltic region, and it also feeds in to our stations that we're building in both Poland and Germany. And that's another element of our business. Last year we opened up our first carbon neutral LNG fueling station in Rostock in Germany. And that has been a huge success for us, where we see the average fueling stations inside of, Germany or in Europe as a general number, like 1,000 to 1,500 tons. This is over 3,000. So it's been a huge success for us as we see Europe changing its move to, say, G mobility or clean vehicles. And so I think by the end of the year, with the build out we're doing inside of Germany and Poland, I think we may be the largest supplier of LNG as a modal transport company inside of Germany. And we do that via our 100% owned subsidiary called Novatek Green Energy, which is based in Poland. So these are little things. So we actually see both sides, but to go outside and say, well, we build a facility somewhere else, probably not likely. What we will consider is going downstream investments, such as a gas to power facility. So we would look at that as an opportunity to enhance the conversion and use of our gas. And one of the things that we talked about and we're still doing work on right now is a potential project in Vietnam. We're working with our partners, Total Energies and Siemens, as well as a local Vietnamese partner, to look at this opportunity of converting gas into a power grid inside of Vietnam.
Okay, that's interesting. And on the topic of marine LNG transport, so Gazprom Neft is looking to launch Russia's first LNG bunkering vessel this year. Is that something Novatec might be interested in?
I don't know if we would look at a bunkering facility itself. I mean, hopefully Gazprom Neft buys their LNG from us for that bunkering facility would be something that I would expect. No, what Novatec's doing is, we're building out the Northern Sea Route logistical model, right? And so throughout this logistical model, we're building a transshipment complex in Murmansk for westbound shipments, and we're building out the transshipment complex in Kamchatka for the eastbound transits. And that's going to be generally two vessels, and that will be used essentially for a hub base as a transshipment, where we'll bring the product from our facilities in Yamal and Gudon to these locations, offload it there, and then vessels will come up to the transshipment complex and take cargoes from those particular vessels. So that's what we're working on. But in terms of a pure bunkering, I have not seen anything that's presented to me yet to have that as one of the models that we're looking at as a potential investment opportunity.
Okay. Well, it's been a very interesting discussion. Before we close things down, do you have any finishing remarks?
Yeah, I would just like to say, I think there's a lot of misconception about Russia as a country, and I saw some comments recently talking about this concept of greenwashing, and what we've done that's probably different than the IOCs, as an example. When Novatec in August published our climate and environmental goals, our targets, right? We set it to 2030. And we set it to 2030 because that is within our strategy period. So we know what we're going to be doing in terms of development opportunities. So now what we need to do is see what else we need to do to meet that goals that we established to 2030. We didn't set aspirational goals. So, and that's what I think many of these are. Many of these 2050 goals are purely aspirational because they don't have a concrete steps in place today to get them. So we'll be held accountable because it's a much shorter period of time. And I think there's a mistake that inside of Russia that we're not doing anything, and that's a false premise, because the government accepted the climate change, Paris climate change in September 2019. They've just outlined, the LNG strategy. We outlined things on the government's working on a decarbonisation process. They're studying, nature-based sinks with reforestation, use of peat moss, all that stuff that we can do as carbon sinks. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to have a little time to develop these things. And I think the company Novatec, the goals and targets that we outlined already are already lower than those that some of these other companies are striving for in 2040. And I said that because we're already at a point where we're 85% plus gas. So we already know, Joseph, in our production of LNG, for example, in 2019, we produced 18.8 million tons of LNG from Yamal. That equated to about a 62 million tons of carbon reduction by switching from coal to gas. And so when we think we can leave up to 70 million tons, if we took at 62 as just a general number, we can reduce emissions of about 170 million tons of carbon from switching from coal to gas. So that is one step that one company can make. And I think that's the process that we're working on, because we're working on a realistic plan to decarbonize our operations as best we can. But I think our carbon footprint is already one of the lowest, and we'll continue working on that. So that's really the last message I would like to leave.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. This has been another episode of In a Nutshell, the podcast hosted by Natural Gas World, where we look at the global news and trends for the gas industry. Thank you, and see you next time.